situation in the very difficult period near the end of Islamic rule in Al-Andalus. And we understood that Muslims, although they brought a fresh civilization to Spain and Portugal and to much of Europe and the world, they were still considered to be the enemies. And so when the Trinitarian forces, and again the key issue that started from the Council of Nicaea, was a struggle between Trinitarian, three gods, and Unitarianism, Tawheed. This was the essence of the struggle. And the Inquisition was set up in such a way to test people, to find out whether they believed in one God or whether they believed in the Trinity. And if they refused to accept the Trinity, they would be burnt alive, put in prison, tortured. Many different things would happen to them. The Islamic response to this, and of course Muslims were living in this land from 711. So if you look from 711 to 1492, you're talking 781 years or so. That's a long period of time. How old is Canada? You see, this is a long period of time. So the masses of the people, and one of the key issues that's not discussed in many books, is that the masses of the Muslims living in Spain were actually the Spanish people themselves. It was the Vandal people, the original inhabitants, who had embraced Islam, who made up the majority of the Muslims. There were Muslims, of course, who came from North Africa, from the Arab lands, from West Africa and other places. But the majority were actually the population. The Inquisition separated people. You are with us or against us. Either you're with us or you're one of the Moors, and the penalty is death. And so the Islamic response to this oppression, of course, is to resist, is to struggle against it in any possible way that they could. And so they resisted physically against it. They could not physically stand up. Then hijrah, migration. So they would make migration and go south. So they were losing territory in the north, and it was going south and south and south, until finally it reached the area of Granada, right, in the last 250 years. So they would continue to go south. The third form of resistance was a type of silent resistance. And this is a special form which we need to become aware of, especially with the change of the world today and some of the very, very difficult situation Muslims find themselves in. In Al-Andalus, it was probably one of the worst possible scenarios, because people were forced to say that they were Christians. And so openly they would say it, but inwardly they keep their Islam. How do you maintain your deen? How do you resist in a case like this? One of the leaders, or the mufti of Wahran in Algeria, was present-day Algeria, Ahmed Boujuma al-Maghrawi, he wrote a fatwa. It's a very amazing fatwa that he wrote, and this around 1504. This fatwa came in. And what he was basically saying, he was saying to the Moriscos people, I know you have been forced to accept Catholicism on the outside, but you're a Muslim on the inside. Okay, and that there is hope for you. There is hope. And the precedent is set by Ammar ibn Yasir, radiallahu anhu, one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, who was being tortured. Remember, the mother of Ammar is Sumayya, right? The father is Yasir, and they are a very famous family who suffered in the early days. And Ammar came to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and said, I have destroyed myself. The Prophet said, how? He said, I said kalimatul kufr. I said it. So then the Prophet ﷺ asked him, how is your heart? And he said, my heart was mutma'in bil iman. I was strong in faith inside. So the Prophet told him, you're still on the path. So the precedent is set that if a person is tortured, la samahallah, and forced to say things and do things beyond their physical control, as long as their heart does not change, then they're still Muslim. So with this as a basis, the Mufti then gave them a system of survival, how to resist, how to remain Muslim in these conditions. And he told them, for instance, that I know that you cannot make salat. I mean, it was so difficult. If you took a bath on Thursday night, you could be punished. So forget about making salat. He said, walk down the street and tap the wall. It's tayammum, right? Dry wudu. That's your wudu. Make salat with your eyes. He said, you want to give sadaqah, zakat, then give a gift to somebody, and the niyyah, the intention is zakat. So you Merry Christmas and give them a gift, and your intention is zakat. You need to have a full bath, a ghusl. You can't take a ceremonial bath, so make the intention and dive in the lake and go swimming. So he gave them a system like this, an amazing system of survival. Somebody dies and you cannot do janazah, so you do the funeral in the Catholic Church. In the middle of the night, do janazah prayer. You get married in the Catholic Church. In the middle of the night, do a nikah. So he showed them how to resist and how to hold on to their faith. And that is really important lesson to us today. If you look at our situation, it's really getting bad, but compare it to this. It's still nowhere near what Muslims went through in Al-Andalus in these final days. And so, literally millions of books were destroyed. One of the worst things of the Spanish colonization is called the scorched earth policy. They would take every single book, anything written, and burn it. Take it in the middle of the square and burn everything. So they burned millions of books, destroyed libraries, destroyed museums. So refugees were now fleeing out of Al-Andalus into Morocco, into Algeria, Tunisia. You will see most of the Muslim countries in the Mediterranean region have a section where the Andalusian people had to flee from this terrible thing. And it was in that last 250 years, that was the area of Granada. That's where the Muslims, their final struggle happened until the king and queen of Aragon, Castilian Aragon, Ferdinand and Isabella. They came down into Granada after a long siege. And they made a treaty with the last leader of the Muslims, Abu Abdullah, who was known as Boabdil. This is the name that they know him as. They made a treaty with him that the Muslim lands would be taken over, but the masjids would be safe, the madrasas would be safe, families safe, and within 20 years, everything was ruined. The masjids turned into churches, madrasas were destroyed, people's lives were under attack, and the date of that surrender is 1492. So that is the importance of 1492, not Christopher Columbus, because he was lost, right? He didn't discover America. You can't discover a place with 75 million people living there. The importance of 1492 is the surrender of Granada. And you know what we found out? We found this out 2 years ago on a journey to Granada, that when this treaty was being signed, when Abu Abdullah is now leaving the room in disgrace, Christopher Columbus is standing at the door. So he witnesses this. And then he goes inside and makes an offer to the king and queen. Now you have power, you need gold. You need riches. I can get it for you. Just give me the money for my ships and I will go into the sea of darkness in order to open up lands. So this really is the key issue happening around that time. And when you look at what happened afterwards, we recognize the fact that the colonization, first is the Portuguese who go out, because the Muslim shipyards were in Lisbon. So wherever the Muslims were strong in a particular area, that's where their renaissance happened. That's where their rebirth happened. If Muslims were strong in math in a certain city, they became strong in math. If you were strong in medicine, they became strong in medicine. Because they were literally taking their culture from us. And so Lisbon, it was the Portuguese first who went out on the boats, followed immediately by the Spanish. And they were the ones struggling for the seas, in the Americas in that early time. And so they call it Reconquista. They call it a reconquest. Actually, it is colonization. Isti'mar. It is a continuation of the colonization of Muslim lands. And when they went around the world, when the Spanish, Portuguese went around the world, and they saw Muslims, they would deal with them in the same way that they struggled against the Muslims in Al-Andalus. And now you can see why. When you see the picture of Columbus that we looked at, on one shoulder he had the monk, the Christian monk, and on the other soldier he had soldiers. And the soldiers were dressed in armor. They were what we call special forces, black ops, commandos, right? These people were hardened killers. They were the ones who Muslims had to struggle against in Granada and in the area in the south. And the Muslims struggled even after 1492. There's a long story of this. Didn't end with 1492. But officially, that was the date of the surrender. And so when they went into these conquered areas, or they went into these far-off areas in the Americas, it is said that Columbus, he went around the coast of Cuba, and he looked up and he saw a masjid, mezquita he called it. He saw a building and he said, that's a mosque. And this is what the President Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey, he mentioned this in his talk when he recently said that Muslims discovered America. That was part of his proof, right? That he put out there. It is actually documented that Columbus, saw this when he went across. But Columbus never reached the mainland. His son, Ferdinand, reached the mainland, and later they sent another killer whose name was Hernan Cortez. And Cortez conquered Mexico, the Aztec people. But when he first came in and saw the Yucatan province, he saw Islamic things and he called it Al-Qahira. He called it Cairo. Right? Everything they were naming after Islamic things because their culture to a great extent was actually based on Islam. Now, the key issue for us, because this is another wave of Muslims coming across. Remember now, the Muslims who had the skills in navigation, they were craftsmen, they were the key people that you'd need on the boats. One of the punishments that they had for a Moresco who was found guilty of a lesser act, if they were not going to burn you at the stake, the lesser punishment was to put you on the boats. So they would put you on the boat and use you in the colonization of their lands. They even checked people out. They said, if they found a man was circumcised, you're a Christian, right? If they found you circumcised, get him on the boat. Because they don't want any trace of Islam or Judaism, because the Jews are circumcised also. No traces. So they put you on the boat. King Philip II, he even ordered the Inquisition to question different people, and it was an official order. Anyone found with circumcision on the boats. So these are the boats that were going across with Columbus and Vasco da Gama, who went around the Cape of so-called Good Hope, Balboa. The people who were manning their ships, for the most part, were actually Muslims. When they went out into the ocean, and this is in their own reports, they also found some strange things. On July 31st, 1502, the Spanish ship, they're in the Caribbean region, and a boat passes them, 40 foot long. They called it a Moorish ship. He said it had about 40 men and women on the boat, and the cloth, they said it's Granada. That's the clothing of Granada, and some of the women had face veils, had niqab. So they said this, and that's obviously not the native people of the Caribbean. So they were running into Muslims in this region because, again, as we already knew, Muslims were coming across. There was a trade that was actually happening to go across. There's a brother, it's a very good website. It's called Islam in Spanish, if any of you know any Spanish-speaking people. Mujahid Fletcher is his name, and he's from Colombia. And his father worked on the Colombian coffee plantations. And his father found a museum on one of the plantations. And in the museum, they said that a boat came to Colombia before Columbus, and on the boat there were Yemenis on the boat. And these Yemenis were drinking coffee, right? And they carried seeds with them. And they actually brought the seeds to Colombia. And they were able to cultivate the coffee. And Colombian coffee now is one of the best brands in the world today. Coffee, as we know, began in Ethiopia and Yemen. This is the original coffee where it began. So there's a lot of reports like this. You'll see in the book, Cyrus Gordon talked about a shipwreck that was found in the Caribbean, and it had coins in it with Arabic writing. They were Muslim coins. This boat is before Columbus. So there's things happening in this region. Amazing things are going on. And in the 16th century, a cardinal named Jimenez, he was a grand inquisitor of Spain. Okay, he's the grand judge. Okay, and they called him the missionary to the Moors. This is up until the 16th century now. In that time, he complained to the king and queen that there's Islam being practiced in your colonies. There's Muslims in the colonies. This is in their records, right? So this is not something we're making up. It's in the Spanish records that the Muslims, he's complaining about this. And you need to have the Inquisition in the Americas, not just in Spain, because Muslims are actually over there. So an example of this is in 1560, there was an Inquisition in Peru, right? Peru was conquered by a person named Juan Pizarro. And the Inca people, very powerful native people there, but amongst them were Muslims. And in 1560, there was an Inquisition, and they executed a person named Lope de la Peña and his cohort Luis Solano. They executed them for practicing Islam in South America. So Muslims were there as part of the society, not something new. We were on those boats. I was in Jamaica some years ago, and a conference was held about Christopher Columbus. We had different religions, different historians. A Jewish rabbi came to the conference and said Columbus was Jewish. I can prove it. And if you think about it, right, how he went to Venice, he got a lot of help from Italian merchants in Venice. Okay, and if you think about the Morenos, who are also escaping out of Spain, and the bases of operations that they set up in the Americas, that they're still benefiting from up until today, you can easily see another migration, a secret migration that they organized amongst themselves to set up colonies, you know, and to benefit, of which they're benefiting from up until today. So this is what we established now. On the early Portuguese, Spanish boats, there's Muslims. So in the early colonies, some of the people who were doing the agriculture, doing the crafts, were actually Muslim people. In 1560, the Spanish established St. Helena in South Carolina. Now, we have to now be able to understand America in the early times. It's difficult because most of us are dumbed down. You know, we're only given certain maps. And we don't understand what happened 50 years ago or 100 years ago. That's intentionally being done to us. But the reality is, it was in 1560, the Spanish actually were controlling right up to the Carolinas. And you'll see over in the middle of America, Texas, California, all those areas was actually Mexico. It was actually part of the Spanish lands, controlled by them. And so the British came, the English came, and they captured this base in St. Helena in South Carolina. And it is said that there were Moriscos amongst the Spanish who were there. And instead of living under this new rule, they fled into the mountains. So they went up into the mountains of North Carolina. These mountains, this is what they call Appalachia. Now, if you look at your map here, you'll see there's a dark area on the right side. This dark area is actually the original America. Okay, that's America. It's called the 13 colonies. Okay, this darkened area here. Here in the southern part, this area, Louisiana, was controlled by the French. And the Spanish controlled this whole area on the side. That's how America used to look like. And it was through purchase. The 13 colonies bought the land from the French and the Spanish. They struggled against the Spanish, bought some of the land from them, right? Of course, they were killing the natives all along. But this is how early America looked like. So the Spanish people were there. Now, a very interesting thing was happening. The Spanish were fighting the British. Because remember, the Portuguese and the Spanish, they were the first ones on the oceans, right? Later on, the French and the British got the technology, and they went on. They wanted colonies themselves. So there was a battle for power on the oceans and in the continents for a few centuries between the British and the Spanish and the French. Okay, they were struggling for power out there. The Portuguese basically submitted to the Spanish. But it's interesting because the British at that time saw the Muslims as allies, and the same the other way, like as they say today, the enemy of your enemy is your friend. You hear that today, right? The enemy of your enemy is your friend. That's how people think today, the same as before. So in that time, the British Empire had a good relationship with Muslims. Even the culture of Britain up until today in the UK, the most important meal in Britain, the most favorite meal is actually butter chicken. It's curry. It used to be fish and chips, right? But right now, the most famous meal, most British people want when they go out, they want curry. The fish and chips is next. Okay, so they've had this preoccupation with Islamic culture. And it's interesting that in those days, they were very much interested in the Ottoman Empire, in the Islamic lands. And, you know, I found a very interesting picture now. Look at the brother on the right. You look at him today and they say, okay, this guy is an Islamist terrorist, right? Look at him with his turban on and his sword and, you know, whatever. This person, this is Abdul Wahid ibn Mas'ud ibn Muhammad Anun, right? He was the principal secretary to the Moroccan ruler Moulay Ahmed al-Mansour. So this was the secretary of Moulay Ahmed to the Queen of England. He's the ambassador. That was the ambassador of Al-Maghrib. And he went to the Queen Elizabeth I in 1600, and he spent a few months in the royal courts. Look at him. Today they would slam him down. They say, look at this terrorist. See how things change, right? But the enemy of your enemy is your friend. This is a political concept. And so this is how it was. And so what this proves to us, right, is that Muslims were serious players in early America. Even when the 13 colonies wanted independence from Britain, who did they go to first? They went to Al-Maghrib. And it was the Moroccans were the first country to recognize the United States. It was Morocco. George Washington. There's a treaty between George Washington and the Sultan of Morocco. They have the written thing between correspondence. All the early presidents of the United States were very keen to please the Muslim leaders, especially in Morocco, because they recognize the power of the Muslims, right? And again, it was against their enemies. So in 1586, Sir Francis Drake, one of the great well-known British admirals, he raided the Portuguese territories. So he raided their territories in Brazil, and he freed about 300 Moorish galley slaves, and he left them on the Roanoke Island in Virginia. Okay, so these are galley slaves. So first you have, in the colony of St. Helena and the other places, you have Muslims who went into the mountains of the Appalachians, right? Then you have Sir Francis Drake, who leaves hundreds of these galley slaves. He just leaves them in Virginia. They go into the mountains because they had problems in the colonies. So they took refuge in the mountains. In 1654, there were reports, these are reports in American books, right, of bearded Portuguese silversmiths. That's what they called them. They were bearded Portuguese silversmiths, and he said they would drop down on their knees many times per day. What were they doing? They're making salat. And they're bearded, and they call them Portuguese. Because remember the Morescos, right? The Morescos would now be Portuguese and Spanish. That's where we were coming from. That was Al-Andalus. So these people are an identifiable group in America. In 1784, Tennessee Governor John Sevier, he met with these people. It's in his books. In the 1700s, Jonathan Swift, he's an Englishman, he married a woman and he called her Mecca Indian. He said, not a regular Indian, not red Indians. He said, this is he described her as a Mecca Indian. Okay, so there's an identifiable group of people living in this area. Okay? In their records, they continue to say, the Spanish would say Moors. But the British, in their records, when they talk about galley slaves and these people, they would talk about Turks, Moors, Greeks, Frenchmen, Negroes, meaning African people, right? They were more defining people, and you can see in some of their records, you'll see the Muslim presence. That is clearly, this is early America now. Who's the people opening up early America? There's a person by the name of Estevanico, who was a Moroccan, and he took the Spanish all the way to Arizona. When the Spanish first went overland in America. His name was Estevanico. He was actually from Morocco. So there are names like this all over the place. There's a number of people. And within our culture, we have Afro-Americans, and we have natives, right? We'll call Indians. We have white Americans, and there's some other groups of people. And they normally would call them Geechee, like Portuguese. This is an identifiable group in the United States. And what is happening is that a person by the name of N. Brent Kennedy, he was suffering from a disease called sarcoidosis. And this is a nerve-based disease. And with DNA studies, they were able to tell the people who have this disease are mainly in the Mediterranean region. So from his work and the work of other historians, we have identified a group called Melungeons. They're the Melungeons. Okay? And many of them, there was Turkish amongst them. They even had a language, had some Turkish in it. This is an identifiable group in the Appalachians. And this is more than likely the descendants of the Muslims that lived in that region. They're not regular Indians. They're not Afro-Americans. They're not European Americans. It's a different group. That picture in front of you, look at the faces. These are Melungeons. Now, where does the name come from? He was trying to get some roots of the name, went through Turkish and Arabic, because they felt that they were cursed. They felt that there was a curse upon them, because their life is really difficult. Appalachian Mountains is the poorest place in America. The Europeans who live there are the poorest white Americans in the whole country. It's in the Appalachians. Okay? So where it comes from, some say it's Mel'oon Jinn, right? Mel'oon Jinni, like. So Melungeon, you see it? Mel'oon is cursed, right? So it's Mel'oon Jinni. You know, because they felt that there was some wicked curse upon them. But in 1990, James Guthrie, he did blood samples of the people. And he traced their blood to the population of North Africa, Turkey, Iraq, and the Mediterranean. This is with DNA. Because with DNA, you can do a lot of studies that they couldn't do before. He traced them to these areas. Okay? Now, the Melungeons, for instance, this is you find many different types of Melungeons, okay? And there's a group here called, they live in the Lumber River, Robeson County in North Carolina. They were called Lumbees. Okay, that's another group, all right? But as early as the 18th century, people would mention these Melungeon people. It wasn't known to the general public, but it was known. And there was a case of Louis Shepard, because in America, interracial marriage was wrong. It was against the law. If you're a European, you could not marry officially a native or an African, only a European. This is an apartheid system, right? And so there was a court case where Judge Louis Shepard, he defended a Melungeon girl, right? You can see how she looks. He defended a Melungeon girl in Tennessee in 1872, and he said they're Portuguese Moors. That was his defense. They're Portuguese. Okay? So this is how the roots go. That's a Melungeon man on the right. Okay? Another description of them is Christianized Portuguese Moors. Christianized Portuguese Moors. They're trying to get some category. They don't want to say Muslim, right? They don't want to bring that out. That is the reality, what is in back of this group of people. So the Melungeon people are actually found all over the United States, especially on the East Coast. And if you live on the southern part of the East Coast, you could be in this Melungeon group. And studies have been done. Brent Kennedy, in his book, The Melungeons, he actually found out the names. So anybody who has the following names who lived in the southeast part of America could be a Melungeon. Adams, Adkins, Bell, Bennett, Berry, Bowling, Chavis, Coleman, Collins, Gibson, Goins, Hall, Jackson, Lopez, Moore, Mullins, Nash, Robinson, Sexton, and Williams. These are pretty popular names that you'll find in that area. Generally, what you'd call like Portuguese, Geechee types. Okay, so this is the group. Some of the Melungeons are really famous people. Again, this is our roots that are lost, and we need to know about our roots, right? Because we don't think that we're part of this society, but we're actually part of this society in many ways. I'll show you some Melungeons. Andrew Jackson, President of the United States, from 1767 to 1845. He was a Melungeon. Okay? Nancy Hanks, the wife of Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States. She was Melungeon. So there's a number of these people. My favorite Melungeon, the one who gives you the real face of a Melungeon, is Elvis Presley. Do you know Elvis Presley? He's a famous musician, rock and roll guy that brought in the rock and roll. Look at his face. Put a thobe on him and a turban. He looks like he comes from Jeddah or something like that, right? Easily look like a Saudi. Look at him. That's the Melungeon look. You see? So this is part of our history. It's a very important part of our history which has been submerged. And N. Brent Kennedy made a famous presentation in the ISNA convention in the United States and brought this out some years ago. These are the books. If any of you would like to look at it a little bit further. The famous fatwa of Mufti Ahmed Bujuma, it's found in Ali Kattani's book, In Bi'at al-Islam fil Andalus. Right? This is a very interesting book. It's in Arabic. It may be translated now. But N. Brent Kennedy, his book called The Melungeons, The Resurrection of a Proud People, an Untold Story of Ethnic Cleansing in America. Serious book. Also, a scholar, an American Muslim scholar named Dr. Umar Farouk Abdullah, he has written an article called Turks, Moors, and Morescos in Early America. Right? So these are, anybody you want to trace these, you want to get his article, especially Umar Farooq Abdullah, you can download that tonight if you want to get more information about this. This is a very interesting group. This is the waves that came with Columbus and just after the time of Columbus. Okay, so these are another identifiable group of Muslims in America that are still playing part in this country, right, in the Americas. And so again, it is wrong for them to say we just came off the boat, we're not part of this society. No, we have a long history in this part of the world. So I want to open up the floor for any general questions that you may have concerning this particular topic. Yes, brother.
As we know that Muslims ruled 700 years in Spain, and we have no traces in Spain.
Yeah.
Okay, right now, the Muslims living in India have the same situation. So, I'm from India, so we have a fear that it's going to happen the same
Yeah.
to the Muslims
Mm.
in India. Because right now, it's a fundamental Hindu government. They are changing the books, and they are they're doing a lot of things that is against to Islam, and we are losing our history. So in this case, what Muslims from India will do?
Yeah, what are the parallels between the Muslims from India and Al-Andalus? It is even said that those who are attacking Muslims who want to do ethnic cleansing, they study Spain. Because Spanish had the worst form of ethnic cleansing possible. Okay? And these are the levels. We have to prepare ourselves before it's too late. Our tendency is to react to things. We can't just react, we have to be proactive. Proactive means we prepare ourselves before it hits us. You see? So this is important in areas like that Muslims wake up and realize the situation. In Spain, alhamdulillah, even though there was this ethnic cleansing that went on, there are Muslims now re-entering the faith. The Spanish government, by the will of Allah, their economy went down. There are many people from Morocco and Algeria who are working in Barcelona and Malaga and those areas there. But aside from that, there are also Spanish who are accepting Islam. Every week, there are people who are embracing Islam there in Spain. They're returning, especially in the province of Granada, because that's the place where the Muslims were for the last 250 years. And now, alhamdulillah, Muslim tourists have come there. They even have halal tourism in Spain now. You go to some restaurants or you stop for gas, and they have a halal section in the shop. That's how many Muslims are coming in there now. And masjids are popping up. So Islam is coming back to that land, even though it had the worst form of ethnic cleansing imaginable. But still they're coming back. But the answer for the Muslim is Islamic revival. To revive Islam now, before it's too late. We have to be aware of this. And we cannot keep thinking it's not going to happen to me, it's not going to happen to me, it just happened to those people over there. You can't think like that. Okay, floor is open for any general questions anybody has concerning anything. Floor is open. So next week, okay, one more question. Yes, brother? Yeah, but this is where the book, these two books here, the book of N. Brent Kennedy, this is a really important study that he did. And fortunately, he was actually funded by Mercer University in Georgia. And so this study is known. And he traced now, using DNA, he traced the blood groups of the Melungeons. You see, it's difficult because they are broken people, spread all around, and from a lot of different heritage, not one group. It could Portuguese, it could be Morescos, Turkish, North African. There's a lot of different blood groups, and it's not an easy thing to really do. But we do know of this Moresco's presence. That's what we can say. And this is some of the documents that we have here that I've been showing you. You can get more details from the book and the article by Dr. Umar Farooq Abdullah. can show you about the presence. But it's a very difficult thing. The Americans just say Geechis, Portuguese, right, which is a broad-based word. What is Portuguese? Who are the Portuguese people? Is it just a language group, or are you talking an ethnic group? Who are the people who came on the Portuguese boats? If we understand the history of Al-Andalus, that's why we studied it. We know about the Morescos, and we can trace our presence there in early America. Now, any other general questions anybody has? Yes, brother. Some of them are becoming Muslim. They're still mainly Christianized, but more and more of them who are studying their roots, are embracing Islam. And like I say, N. Brent Kennedy, he made his presentation at the ISNA convention, Islamic Society of North America, some years ago. And so this is a groundbreaking presentation of this new group. But it's very difficult because they're really depressed people and they've suffered a lot. But this is the first step, that they can identify their roots, where they're coming from, right? That's why we call this course Deeper Roots, right? Look into your heritage, look into your roots. A lot of people are doing that in the Americas, and they're recognizing their presence, within Islam. And so next week, inshallah, we want to look at the slavery period. And this is a very interesting period because you will see millions of Muslims actually came into the Americas during the slave trade. And you'll see scholars, and you'll see some very interesting discussions and written documents that are there in our study of Deeper Roots. So I leave you with this. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. Have a safe journey home. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.